This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there.
From Innistrad to Shadowmoor, what spooky top 10 does Nitsuhone have in store?
Hi everyone, and welcome to another spooky MTG Top 10. Every Friday this month I'm doing a Halloween-inspired Top 10. So far I've looked at the best cards in Innistrad Midnight Hunt and the best vampires in the game, and today we're looking at bats. Bat is one of Magic's oldest creature types, making its debut in 1994's Legends. And over the years, bats have shown up from time to time in Magic sets, but bats are particularly interesting to look at right now, not only because they're spooky, but also because in the last year or so, we've seen more bats printed than had been printed in more than 3 decades of Magic history that came before. This is because we had 2 sets, Lost Caverns of Ixalan and Bloomburrow, where bats were all over the place. In the latter, bats even got a whole bunch of typal support. In all, there are 55 cards in Magic that have the bat creature type or make bat creature tokens, and in this video we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points. This includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like Regional Championships. At number 10, it's Belfy Spirit. For 3 generic and 2 white, it's a 1/1 flyer with Haunt, and that means when it dies, you can exile it, haunting target creature, and when Belfy Spirit enters or the creature it haunts dies, you make 2 black 1/1 bat creature tokens with flying. So in the end, you spend 5 mana and you get 5 1/1 flyers. That's a pretty great deal. Haunt can be a little tricky to get going sometimes, but the baseline here is pretty decent too. Belfy Spirit picked up a Pro Tour top 8 in the Ravnica Block Pro Tour, where it was played in an Orzhov aggro deck. This deck had a hefty sacrifice sub-theme, thanks to Ghost Council of Orzhova and Plague Rusalka, and that made it easier to let the Spirit haunt something, and easier to make the haunted creature die too. However, the Spirit never saw play in any other formats. It was a little too finicky and a little too expensive to work out in formats with larger card pools. At number 9, it's Dirge Bat. For 2 generic and 2 black, it's a 3/3 with flash and flying. It also has Mutate for 4 generic and 2 black. This means you can cast it for that alternate cost and put it over or under target non-human creature you own, and they mutate into the creature on top plus all the abilities from under it. In other words, the mutated creature has the stats of the creature on top and the text box of all the cards in the pile. And that's important here because when Dirge Bat mutates, you destroy target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. A 4 mana 3/3 with flash and flying is already a pretty good ambush blocker, so it's great that you can also turn this into a straight up removal spell, either by mutating it onto something else or mutating something onto the bat. All of Dirge Bat's points came in the standard of 2020, where it was played in Dimir Flash decks. These were tempo decks that could counter and kill stuff at instant speed, just as easily as they could cast creatures, and the pair of Dirge Bat and Sea Dasher Octopus was pretty nasty. Mutating onto the Dirge Bat with the Octopus is a lot more efficient than casting the Bat for its alternate cost, so paying 2 mana to put the Octopus on the Bat was an amazing play, since it would kill something and let you start drawing cards with your evasive creature. However, Dirge Bats hasn't put up any top 8 since rotating out of Standard. At number 8, it's Darkstar Augur, the first Bloomburrow bat to make an appearance on the list. For 2 generic and a black, it's a 2/3 flyer with Offspring for 1 black. If you pay that additional cost when the Augur enters, you get a 1/1 copy of it, and both the Augur and its token copy come packing a powerful upkeep trigger, because at the beginning of your upkeep you reveal the top card of your library and put that card into your hand, and you lose life equal to its mana value. So, it's more expensive than Dark Confidant, but it also has way more upside between the larger flying body and the potential to get the trigger twice in upkeep. Obviously, losing life can be dangerous, but if your deck has a low curve and or some ways to gain life, you can really offset it. Besides, this can draw you so many cards that you often win before the life loss matters anyway. If you decide to make the token, your opponent also has to kill 2 creatures to keep you from getting way ahead on cards. It's become a key card in Abzan and Orzhov midrange decks in Standard, and it's even got a Pioneer top 8 from a Jund deck. Given that it so closely resembles one of the best black creatures of all time, one has to imagine that Darkstar Augur is going to put up lots of top 8s in the future. At number 7, it's Starscape Cleric. Another offspring bat from Bloomburrow, Starscape Cleric is 1 generic and a black for a 2/1 flyer that can't block. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and its offspring cost is 2 generic and a black. All of the Cleric's top 8s have come in Pioneer, where it briefly found a home in the Amalia Life combo deck. The deck's game plan is to get Wild Growth Walker and Amalia into play, then when you explore, the Walker gets a counter and gains you life, which triggers Amalia, who explores, and from there it just keeps on happening. If you have something like Starscape Cleric in play, the combo ends the game without you ever having to attack since you end up with so many life gain triggers. Bad news for Starscape Cleric though, Amalia got banned in Pioneer just last month, and as of now, it doesn't have a home in any format. So even though it only just got started, it might also be done putting up points. At number 6, it's Eyetwitch. For 1 black mana, it's a 1/1 with flying, and when it dies, you learn. This means you can either discard a card from your hand and draw a card, or reveal a lesson in your sideboard and put it into your hand. The latter option is usually more powerful, as it is effectively drawing a card instead of rummaging, and while there are only so many cards with the lesson subtype, there are enough of them around for you to treat your sideboard like a pretty sweet toolbox. Eyetwitch was featured in both aggro and control decks while it was in Standard, and the decks that ran it could grab lessons like Pest Summoning, which you could grab when you wanted to add to the board, Start from Scratch, which you could get when there was a problem artifact in play, or 1 damage can make a big difference, and Necrotic Fumes, which you could grab if you needed removal. You can see why it would be powerful to learn when you have access to cards like that, and the decks that ran this bat usually had nice sacrifice stuff going on too. Sacrificing it to Deadly Dispute, for example, was particularly nasty, since you'd give up the Eyetwitch, get a card from learning, draw 2, and make a treasure. Eyetwitch hasn't put up any top 8 since rotating out of Standard though. We're probably going to need some more impressive lessons printed in the future for that to happen. At number 5, it's Zoraline, Cosmos Caller, another Bloomburrow bat, and this one is legendary. For 1 generic, a white, and a black, it's a 3/3 with flying and vigilance. Whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain 1 life, and when Zoraline enters or attacks, you can pay a white and a black and 2 life to put a non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard directly on the battlefield with a finality counter on it. Much of Zoraline's value comes from her enters and attacks trigger, which, when it has something to bring back, feels amazing. I mean, not only do you get a card back, you put it directly on the board, and it isn't like Zoraline isn't a threatening creature in her own right either. It's also nice that you can cast it for 3 when you need to, but you can also wait until you have 5 mana to make sure you get a permanent back right away. Zoraline's points so far have all come in Standard Orzhov midrange decks, where she's got lots of juicy targets to bring back, including Liliana of the Veil and Preacher of the Schism. Zoraline is going to continue to rack up points in Standard going forward, provided there are Orzhov decks around with a bit of a graveyard sub-theme, and one has to imagine that's going to continue to be the case. At number 4, it's Skeletal Vampire. This creature is a skeleton and a vampire, and he makes bat tokens, so he's super spooky. For 4 generic and 2 black, it's a 3/3 flyer, and when it enters, you make 2 1/1 black bat creature tokens with flying. You can also pay 3 generic and 2 black and sacrifice a bat to make 2 more bat tokens, and you can sacrifice a bat to regenerate the vampire too. So initially you spend 6 mana to get a 3/3 and 2 1/1 flyers. That's pretty good, especially for 2006. And then this vampire can do all sorts of other stuff with those bats. Being able to sacrifice one and regenerate the vampire for no mana at all is particularly nasty, as it means as long as there's a bat around, Skeletal Vampire is going to be difficult to take down. The other ability is pretty great too, and is not a bad place to spend your mana in the late game, because more bats is just going to be good for you. In short, this vampire is capable of generating and effectively utilizing a bat army. It dominated Ravnica Block Constructed, showing up in 6 of the top 8 decks at the Block Pro Tour, and it was no slouch in Standard either. In all cases, it was played in control and mid-range decks. However, it hasn't gained any points since it rotated out of Standard. At number 3, it's Sanguine Evangelist, another vampire that makes bat tokens. It's kind of nice that the 2 vampires who were on this list didn't make the vampire list last week, so they still get to have a bit of a spotlight. Anyway, the Evangelist is 2 generic and a white for a 2/1 with Battle Cry, which means that when it attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. When the Evangelist dies or enters, it makes a 1/1 flying bat token. So in terms of raw stats, you pay 3 mana for a 2/1 and 2/1/1 flyers with a power boost mixed in from an attack. That's a great rate, and it makes it very difficult for your opponent to ever come out ahead against the Evangelist. There's always going to be a pesky bat token left around. It's been heavily played in Standard since being printed, and it's always featured in token decks that are great at going wide. This includes more aggressive Boros token decks, as well as the grindier token decks that use Caretaker's talent to get maximum value out of tokens. It's also seen a bit of play in the token-heavy Pioneer Selesnya aggro deck. The Evangelist is in a great spot to keep putting up top 8s, but the 2 cards in front of it are also being heavily played right now, like our number 2 card, which is Aclazotz Deepest Betrayal. You might have thought that this literal bat god would be at number 1 on the list, but it didn't quite get there. For 3 generic and 2 black, it's a 4/4 flyer with flying and lifelink, and when it attacks, each opponent discards a card, and for each opponent who can't, you draw a card, and whenever your opponent discards a land, you make a 1/1 bat token with flying. All of that's already pretty great, as you get a large flying threat that disrupts the opponent in a big way. The fact you get value out of the discard trigger no matter what is great. You either make your opponent discard a real card, or you get to draw a card, or you make a 1/1 bat token. All of those are pretty sweet outcomes, and of course Aclazotz's ability to make bat tokens works with the other discard effects in your deck too. But Aclazotz's upside doesn't end there, because when it dies, you return it to the battlefield tapped and transformed. It becomes Temple of the Dead, a land that taps for black, and you can pay 2 generic and a black to transform it back into Aclazotz, although you can only activate that ability if a player has 1 or fewer cards in their hand, and only as a sorcery. That's a pretty easy condition to meet, since it works when any player is low on cards, not just your opponent. So in short, Aclazotz generally doesn't stay dead. Dealing with Aclazotz once in a game is hard enough, dealing with it twice is pretty impossible. All of that power has led to Aclazotz being heavily played in both Standard and Pioneer. It's practically a staple in Standard right now, where it most frequently shows up in mid-range and aggro decks. It's a nice creature to have at the top of your curve, because normally you start to run out of gas, and if your opponent kills your 5-drop before you can kill them, the game is usually over. But if they kill Aclazotz after you've dumped your whole hand on the board, that's not going to be enough for them to stop you from killing them. In Pioneer, it actually appears more often in control decks, including in the discard-focused Waste Not deck, that can get even more value out of Aclazotz's discard trigger. Aclazotz is going to keep on putting up points, but the card in front of it is too, and in fact, they see play alongside one another in mini decks, and that card is Deep-Cavern Bat. That's right, this regular bat beat out a bat god. For 1 generic and a black, it's a 1/1 with flying and lifelink. And when it enters, you look at your opponent's hand and they exile a non-land card from it until Deep-Cavern Bat leaves the battlefield. 2 mana creatures that make your opponent discard tend to see play, and this is one of the best versions of that we've seen, on a similar level as the multi-format All-Star Kite Sail Freebooter, as both give you tons of information and let you exile a card from your opponent's hand. The bat gives up a toughness in exchange for lifelink, but that's a pretty good trade. It's just great to play a creature that so effectively disrupts the opponent, especially when you can get in for 1 every turn while gaining you life. Deep-Cavern Bat is seeing play in lots of black decks in Standard and Pioneer, and is even making a little bit of noise in Modern. It's very likely to continue to put up points and to maintain its lead over Aclazotz. So those are the top 10 bats in Magic the Gathering. If you want to own any of these Chiropterans, check out the description where you can find a direct Card Kingdom link for each card that appeared in the video. If you want to make sure you catch future videos, don't forget to subscribe, and if you want to catch up on many more MTG top 10s, including more that are Halloween inspired or that look at specific creature types, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.